Thank you, Chair. First of all, very welcome. And actually, Regulator, I take it from where you started is like the water services in Ireland have suffered for decades of underinvestment, and the statistics, when you look at them, is quite frightening. With 40% of all treated water being lost to leaks, and probably the other one, which is even more worrying, the 25% of water treatment plants fail to meet international standards. But can I just take to one, because I think we have an enormous responsibility to make sure everything is transparent and crystal clear and how we are doing and the steps we're taking, both this committee, Irish Water and the regulator. So can I just, to be quite clear on it, on the timeline, the first factor that's coming is there's a price control submission. That can't be made, and this is probably a question to Irish Water, that can't be made to the regulator until the Cabinet makes the decision on the free water allowance and the subvention. And is there any other controlling factor that may delay the price control submission to the regulator? I'm going to just deal with question by question and rather than leave the low there.
Through the Chair, we will be submitting a price control at the end of February. The other factors can come after that event in terms of the announcement on subvention and price, but we still can make the proposal. Okay, and can you just detail me exactly what is in the price control, what you will be putting into the price control submission to the regulator?
Well, essentially, the price control submission will cover the 3-year period, 2014 to 2016 inclusive, and it will be laying out, I suppose, our strategy to deliver the government objectives of providing a safe, clean and affordable water service to consumers. So in our outlining our strategy, it's based on the utility model, and we will go into quite a bit of detail on the individual elements of the utility model. Now, I suppose in that regard, if you look at other economies that have gone down this road, there's probably a well-established model there. So in the same way the regulator mentioned, their interaction with other regulators, we'd be familiar with that model, and we will give the detail that the regulator will need to form an opinion on our costs. Okay, and at that stage, it'll be based on expenditure. So we'll submit our operating expenditure and our capital expenditure proposals. Okay. And then the next step will be the tariff structure and connection charges. So will that include the price per 1,000 litres, the cost of the connection charge to the business or the consumer? So and that's to be made in March. So will that include the price per 1,000 litres or cubic litre?
Perhaps we should take this one because we know what we're expecting to see in, so hopefully that's what they're going to send into us. What we expect is submissions on how what the tariff structure would look like, both for a metered supply and for an unmetered supply, both for domestic and non-domestic. Now, there may be more detail on domestic because there's a lot more work that we need to do on non-domestic, so we might put that, do more work on that next year. And so it's got nothing to do with the actual price level. So we will issue in April, as Paul said before, a consultation paper on the tariff structures.
Yep. And quite a quantity will be non-metered supplied. Can I just say, would you expect at that stage, there's a large quantity of customers at the moment that would be connected to the to mains water, but would not have an outfall to a treatment plant. They would be in septic tanks or whatever. So would you expect a difference in charging level because the costing is up? So you would see 2 costings within that?
Yes.
Yeah, and you take into account that the treatment of water is actually much more costly than the production.
Well, this we have to look at. I don't know yet what the cost differences are. And then just in relation to will the standing charge be included at that stage as well? Standing charge, or do you expect the standing charge to come in at that stage? I would expect proposals on what the standing charge might look like. Not so much again in terms of what the level will be, because we're not talking about cost at that stage. It's more, for example, the relative size of the standing charge compared to the variable charge. I would expect some information from Irish Water on that basis. And then we would look at that, and then when we start reviewing the costs, we'd feed in the cost figures into those standing charges and variable charges to get a good feel for what like an average will be for a family or for an individual person in a house, to see what sort of charges are be there.
But that would all just be relating, that wouldn't be the cost per 1,000 litres, that would be just relation to the standing charge.
Well, no, you'd look at overall how much a typical family might use, and you might look at different levels of standing charge and different levels of variable charge, just to see what the range of charges might be.
Just in relation, is Irish Water is often compared to Scottish Water. In relation to standing charges, in the UK they use a standing charge that's related to your rates. You wouldn't envisage that you would see a standing charge related to property tax here in Ireland, would you?
No.
No, because that would be the model that's been used in a lot of other
Well, obviously,
countries.
we're looking to the example of other countries and looking at the benefits and disbenefits of the different approaches. But I mean, what we want to do is get the one that best suits the Irish customer, and I see no automatic link between valuation of houses and standing charges.
No, it's just that that's the model that's used elsewhere. So.
Yeah, well, we'd look at that, but it doesn't mean we're going to go that way. So.
Yeah, and as Irish Water, any thoughts on our agencies that they'll be making the submission?
Well, in terms of making a submission, we obviously have to make it to the regulator first, who then publish it.
Just at that stage, that comes in March. Will that submission? Is each submission? Will that go up online for the public to see?
Sorry. In relation to the any submission, obviously, let's take the one on costs. We'll get the submission on costs in February. We have to analyse that. We have to determine whether or not we think they're reasonable, etc. It's only when we've done that analysis then we would intend to publish both our analysis and the submission in order to give people a full picture. That would be the standard process we would go through. We don't normally take submission and immediately publish it because it doesn't have the value added in terms of the view as to whether or not those costs are efficiently incurred, etc.
And then just finally on this element of the questioning, the water charge plan submission in June. Mm-hmm. So at that stage then there's an expectation that Irish Water would then submit what they would envisage the cost per 1,000 litres.
In June, the publication of the detail around water charges, yes, at that stage we would be putting out what indicative water charges might be for a decision to be made in August.
So the earliest the consumer will get an idea of what their indicative charge will be per 1,000 litres will be when that submission arrives in June.
Based on the process that we've outlined, we receive a submission on cost in February. We'll publish proposed tariff levels in June for consultation. That's when we would expect to be there to be knowledge around what the overall water.
And that consultation period will take how long?
We look at it on a case-by-case basis, but typically our consultation period is at least 4 weeks.
4 weeks. So realistically, then before consumers will know what their price per litre will be end of July, beginning of August?
It'll be August. August is the date by which we plan to publish our decision.
Okay. Just, and this again is the regulator, and there's been a huge focus on costs and how much cost per litre. But I would imagine there's an awful lot more involved in the regulation of Irish Water than just cost. And I'm looking at what happens just across the Irish Sea. There's targets set, and I'm just wondering, will you be setting targets for example, for leakage? There's targets set for sewer flooding because we're doing a combined drain. So there's targets set for those sewer floodings. In the wastewater treatment plant, there's targets set for capacity, for odour abatement. So will we see, or maybe could you explain, what other targets and monitoring elements that will be related to, that you'll be involved in regulating with Irish Water?
We will be regulating Irish Water in terms of the standards that they achieve in the widest sense. So in relation to quality, for example, we would be in discussion with the likes of the EPA to determine what are the key issues, and therefore what are the key improvements that need to be made on a national basis in order to meet the requirements, for example, of the European directives on wastewater treatment and so forth. And typically what we would do on any price control is, as well as determining what the overall costs are, what is that delivering? So what are the targets that have to be achieved in terms of quality, output, etc. And that is typical of the process that we would go through. It's probably worth bearing in mind that we're doing an interim review control for a period of 2 years before we then step into a full 5-year control. And those 2 years will allow us to gather even more information in order to make that full 5-year control that it's fully defined and detailed in terms of the targets that we would set for Irish Water. Separate to that, we may also consider what are the standards we expect them to achieve in terms of customer service, complaint handling, etc. So all of these things are typical of what the regulator will consider. And then, once we've set those, we then enter into what we call a monitoring phase, which is reviewing through performance reporting or whatever in terms of what has actually been achieved on a month-by-month or quarter-by-quarter or annual basis, depending on what's the appropriate reporting cycle.
So you're looking at a settle-in period of about 2 years, and then you will then start looking at setting targets for leakage reduction, lead pipe replacement, sewer flooding, etc., etc., etc.
Again, we haven't defined what all of these targets and standards would be at this point in time, but yes, we would be setting standards. But just because we have an interim control period doesn't mean that we wouldn't also be setting standards during that interim control period. It's just that we will have a 2-year period and then a full 5-year period. That's
Okay. Just quickly, Mr. Tierney, just because I'd asked parliamentary questions before in relation to this, I just want a little bit of clarity in relation to the bonus structure, and I absolutely take your points of clarification where there's no increment payment to staff, and et cetera, but just in the parliamentary question, you answered me that the bonus structure operates somewhere between 3 and 14%. Just what's the structure in the bonus repayment at the different is that different salaries the bonuses kick in, the different percentages? So somebody typically on 20,000, would they be on the lower 3%, and somebody on 100,000 be on 14%? Just what's the structures there of the bonus?
That's correct. Yeah, it works from...
So the higher your salary, the larger your bonus if you hit your targets.
The larger the element that's put at risk.
So somebody on 100,000, we could look at a 14,000 euro bonus, and somebody on a 20,000 would be looking at a pretty miserable bonus if they hit their targets.
That's the structure as devised.
And that's just, and then just one thing that was raised with me yesterday in relation to recruitment, that there was a number of positions advertised in Irish Water, and Bord Gáis employees then applied for those and then transferred into those, but they transferred at a higher salary than what the jobs were initially advertised at. Did that happen? And if it did, how many?
That's correct in the case of 10, I think. I'd have to confirm the exact figure, but I think it's 10.
So and those 10 jobs were advertised at what salary rate?
I haven't the exact detail.
But they were advertised, I think, at about 50,000, weren't they?
Well, there was a series of different jobs and a series of different differentials in relation to those particular jobs.
Right, but they were...
But I think we've actually supplied, we may have supplied the details separately on that.
Well, if you could, and maybe just the question for Bord Gáis is those staff that transferred over, if they were replaced, at what salary rates were they replaced at?
Well, I can't definitively say they were all replaced. I'd say we have been trying to downsize, so some of them may have been replaced, but that would have been open competition. And it just depends on the requirements. Sometimes people from internally might have got promoted and it'd be replaced at a lower level.
Yeah.
Well, so there's no one set rule for.
Well, maybe when you're coming back to me, Mr. Barry, you might come back to me, because what is kind of my concern on this is that Bord Gáis uses as an opportunity to downsize their own costs and move it onto Irish Water. And I certainly would like some reassurance that this didn't happen, and I would like to see the costs and the analysis of that. So could you provide that to me?
But I think the expertise that these people would provide in the particular areas in relation to their previous experience in utility will be hugely valuable to Irish Water.
Mr. Tierney, I accept that. The example that was given to me was that the job was advertised at approximately €50,000. A staff member applied for that in Bord Gáis, transferred over at approximately €70,000. Certainly, I think you may have had an awful lot more applications for that job position if it was advertised at 70,000, which was filled at, rather than the 50,000. And I would ask the regulator to look at that quite closely as well, because certainly I would not like to see a cost transfer from Bord Gáis to Irish Water, which the customer eventually has to pick up. Like, if a job's advertised for 50,000 and somebody applies for it and gets it, to my mind, the job should be filled at that level, rather than what that may have happened. But I'll wait for the further clarification on it, and I would ask the regulator to have a look at that quite closely.
Before you vote away, each of the rates across are put at market rates. And a higher element in the higher sales scale salaries is put at risk. That's the purpose in relation to that.
Sorry, maybe you misunderstood me. My understanding was those jobs were advertised at market rates.
No, I'm talking about the pay element that you mentioned earlier.
You're talking about the bonuses, and I said the higher you earn, the higher your bonus, the higher the percentage of bonus. Accept what you're saying there, Mr. Tierney. No, I thought you misunderstood me there. That the jobs were advertised at 50,000 and they were filled at 70. So I would say as a lot more people would have applied if they had been advertised at 70.
But sorry, I think in terms of the detail of that in relation to the numbers and the differentials. We'll come back to you on that.
Yeah, I would, and I'd also ask for Bord Gáis to come back separately and give me the details of how those positions were backfilled and at what rates of salaries. And I just got to finish very briefly. I just wanted to ask in relation to which happens in an awful lot in urban areas, is that there's a single feed into 2 or 3 houses. And they can't be metered. And the other thing, which is especially in Dublin, Cork, Galway and Limerick, is apartment dwellers are used to paying for their utilities individually. And my understanding is the proposal that Irish Water is saying is that there will be a single levy that apartment dwellers will not be able to be metered. Now, can that be dealt with? And can be a time period put on that and how that would be dealt with?
Maybe in relation to the first category, first of all, it's a very common feature of particularly the cities that buildings, properties, residential properties from a certain period had a common backyard service, and those services are very often lead pipes and they're very often in poor condition. There has been a fair bit of work done in starting to remedy those, which is complicated and expensive work because you have to put a pipe in the front and mould services to the backs of the houses. So over time, we certainly over a relatively short period of time, but it probably will take 10 years, we would hope to eliminate all of those through a programme of work. As I said, it's taking out both the lead issue, it's taking out leakage issues, it's improving the service, and that then makes them available for metering. Clearly, they're not amenable to metering at the moment. I think in relation to apartments and other multi-use properties, we have carried out some pilot work into the potential for metering of apartments. It's a very complicated area because buildings of different types and again from different ages have all kinds of different plumbing systems. Some apartment buildings, for example, have about 3 separate feeds to individual apartments to different parts of the system. So it's a very complex area. There's a percentage of multi-use buildings, of multiple occupation buildings, which do have individual stopcocks from the front, and they can be metered. So what we're looking at in relation to the balance beyond phase 1 of the metering are the options, and that will be a matter for being able to fund that and deliver that over time. But certainly, it's beyond the scope of phase 1.
Thank you.